Hey, hello everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm excited to be here, excited to talk to you all. My name is Jessica Wirt. I am a UX or user experience strategist at UX consulting company TrueMatter. We are headquartered out of Columbia, South Carolina, which is also where I'm from. And today I'm going to talk to you about unicorns. But not just any old kind of unicorn. I'm here to talk to you about UX unicorns. There's a myth running around in our industry today, all about unicorns. A lot of companies hear about this fabled UX stuff and all of the sorts of things that UX is doing for other companies and for their peers. So they're hearing about amazing metrics, amazing results, and they think to themselves, awesome, I want that for my company and for my digital product as well, which they should. But a lot of companies also along those lines think, sweet, I'll just hire a UX person to swoop in, do all the UX stuff, like I would hire maybe a developer or an information architect, someone along those lines. So they think they can hire a single person to come in and do UX for them. We jokingly refer to these new UX hires at TrueMatter as UX unicorns, because while they sound great and even magical in theory, they do not exist. No one person can handle all of the aspects involved in creating excellent user experiences all by themselves, even those that are, technically speaking, UX professionals. And this myth, combined with a lot of other myths, creates sort of a bad experience or leave a bad taste in a lot of companies' mouths in regards to UX. So I want to debunk that myth and a couple others. I want to do so by talking about what UX is not. There are a lot of misunderstandings about what UX is, and so that means that companies that know they want UX know-how incorporated into their internal teams don't know how to go about incorporating that knowledge in the right way. And it really starts with a fundamental misunderstanding of UX. So UX is not, first of all, a Band-Aid. That means if you have a poorly built digital product or poorly envisioned, strategized digital product, you cannot simply slap UX on top and expect to see amazing results and amazing metrics come out of that effort. Similarly, UX is not something that you can tack on to the last end of a project. It's not a last minute or a quick fix. UX is involved in everything from early discovery and definition, those very first conversations, all the way through implementation and testing. So there is no such thing as a designated UX phase. It cannot be isolated in that way. We'll talk more about practically what that looks like in a little bit. But last of all, of course, UX is not something that one magical being, however awesome they are, can handle all by themselves. And if UX is not something that one person can do all by themselves, obviously that implies that excellent user experience and really excellent digital products take a team. And that really is the case. A fully fledged project team is comprised of people from multiple disciplines. And there are really 5 core disciplines that are always going to be involved in a fully fledged project team. That includes a UX team. So at TrueMatter, we're a UX consulting team, but at other companies, obviously, there are internal teams that work on digital products. Even so, they would, even if they don't have that UX knowledge embedded, they would still ideally have 5 core disciplines represented. So those are developers, visual designers, content strategists, user researchers, and information architects. Some of these probably seem familiar to you, maybe all of them do, but it also won't surprise me if a couple of them are a little bit fuzzy or you've heard about them, but you're not quite sure what they do. So I'm going to walk through them in a second. It's important to understand that these are the 5 core disciplines involved in a hands-on project team. So I'm not talking about the business analysts or scrum masters or marketing and sales, none of those people. Those people are obviously incredibly important to the ultimate success of a digital product, but they're not the hands-on day-to-day people involved in that sort of work. Now, another important thing to understand is Yes, an ideal digital product team is going to have all 5 of these disciplines represented and working together throughout really every phase of the project. But within each of these disciplines, there is actually a smaller group of professionals that are considered UX experts or UX pros, however you want to phrase that. So within the development community, there is a smaller group of people that are considered UX developers. And the same is true down the line. So for an example, just practically speaking, I am a UX strategist at TrueMatter, right? So I'm a UX professional. That's my job title. I actually come from a background of content strategy. So I fall into that content strategy bucket, but I'm in that smaller group that is considered a UX professional. And within each of these disciplines, those UX professionals are thinking about, of course, a lot of the same things that all of their peers within the same discipline are thinking about in terms of creating, building, designing, et cetera, a digital product. But they're also thinking about those things a bit differently. And it really comes down to their focus on the user. That is what ultimately changes how your team operates. And it's what changes the sorts of metrics and results that you're going to see. So let's walk through each of these disciplines and also take a look at how UX professionals within those disciplines are thinking about things a little bit differently. Starting with the developers. I'm not going to go into detail about what a developer is. You probably are most familiar with this job title. But UX developers are thinking about things differently. They're thinking about how to build a product. Yes, but how to build that product for actual users and use cases that are on the other side of it. Likewise, they're thinking about guarding against extra features and functions that users don't actually need. So they're cutting out a lot of the fluff, essentially. And they're building with reusable patterns for experience consistency. Consistency is a major aspect in an excellent user experience. So that's what they're aiming for. Next up, we have visual designers. So these are the people that are obviously thinking about things like style, tone, layout, all of the above. UX visual designers are thinking about layouts and styles, yes, but for how real people actually operate online. And this is sort of a trend that you see throughout user experience and just in a lot of the user experience best practices is that people do not behave most of the time how you actually would expect a person to behave online. They just surprise us. People are surprising. And so that's where a lot of UX best practices emerge from. So visual designers that are UX professionals are thinking about how real people will actually interact with their design. So they're considering interactive behavior as it relates to design, of course. And they're also building or designing task-based layouts, styles, et cetera, that communicate how to actually use an interface. So they're thinking not just tone, style, layout, but what does the user need to accomplish when they come to this screen that I'm designing? And how can my design support that ultimate effort and that ultimate goal? Next up, we have content strategists. You may be a little bit less familiar with this discipline, and that's fine. These are the people that are really writers. A lot of them come from backgrounds of psychology, English, or whatever language that you're working in. These are the people that fundamentally are trying to understand content, organize it, and present it in a way that makes sense and is intuitive. So content strategy is really very closely tied to user experience. Of course, not all the time. So UX content strategists are thinking about things like how to present information and, again, actions for how real people digest words online. This is a really great example of what I mentioned earlier. People don't behave how you expect them to. So people do not read online. The rule that I go by, at least, is 80 to 90% of text on a screen is just never going to get read. So that changes completely how you approach important things like headings, instructions, organizing content, getting people to the right tasks. And that's really what content strategy is about when you have a user focus, specifically the right words to guide users to the right task. We're also, like developers, thinking about reusable content patterns that support design and development. So again, aiming for that overall experience consistency. Next up, we have user researchers. I'm sure you're familiar with researchers on some level. User researchers are a bit different. This is more of a traditional UX role. So they're not doing market research or any sort of sales research. They are observing real people using products in real life. So that means the real people for a specific digital product, not just any old person out there that uses the internet. They're focusing on the specific users of an experience. They're designing and conducting activities leading to valuable interactive input from those specific users. And they're using task-based tests to see what is and is not actually working. So they're really the ones that test things out, test out all of the design and the interactions and the content. But even super early in a project, before all of that strategy is sort of laid out, they're doing that initial research with people to see, okay, what do we need to know about this specific group of users and their nuances and who they are in order to guide strategy for the rest of the project. And last but not least, we have information architects. This particular discipline is more of a traditional UX discipline as well. These people are thinking about things like organizational structures that, again, make sense to real people. They're balancing functional yet human understandable interfaces and interactions, and they're paying attention to technical requirements and writing those and formulating those requirements to be focused on user interactions. So you can think about these people almost like a bridge between content strategists and developers. They understand a bunch of the technical aspects and how systems really work from a technical perspective, of course, but then they're also still focusing on that extremely human, understandable side. Okay, so we've covered our 5 disciplines and how UX professionals within those disciplines think differently. This is our ideal product team. Even teams that don't have any UX knowledge involved or implemented in any sort of way, it's still best to always have these 5 disciplines represented. Now, what you'll notice is that the 5 disciplines and a group of people working on a digital product in each of those disciplines far outweighs what any one special professional can do all by themselves, no matter how magical, how wonderful they are, even with a UX focus. Excuse me. So, if we understand intuitively that a team is better than a single individual by themselves, why do so many companies still have unicorns on the brain? I think many companies, even the ones that have a fundamental understanding of what UX is, fail in regards to incorporating UX into their digital product team because they don't understand what UX practically looks like. They also don't understand how to go about incorporating it. And we'll cover that too. But first, I just want to show you an example of what UX looks like and what UX does in practice. This is what happens when you talk consistently for 13 and a half minutes. So pardon the coughs. This is actually a before screen of a healthcare intranet that TrueMatter has worked on in the past. This intranet is internal to the organization, of course, so it was used by nurses, doctors, of course. Here, pause and take a sip of my coffee real quick. You could probably hear me sipping that coffee, but that's all right. Just take a look for a second at the different issues that you can already identify with this particular digital product. Oh my goodness. It obviously needs quite the user experience overhaul. It really needs a digital product team in general. It's pretty clear that not all of the 5 disciplines involved in a fully fledged project team were involved here in the first place, and that's okay. This is not a knock against Lexington Medical Center, this company. This is just the reality of what a lot of teams are facing. You know, they don't have fully fledged teams and they don't have UX expertise already involved. And so this is what is produced. It's important to understand that all of the links and drop downs here, everything you're seeing functioned correctly from a technical perspective, but it just simply wasn't usable. So nurses performing time-sensitive tasks had a ton of difficulty coming to this screen and being able to access the right document or the link that they were looking for, especially if they didn't already know exactly where it was or the path to reach it. So clearly needed a UX overhaul. And this is what that looked like. So I'll just let us absorb this for a second too. It's always sort of a relief when I get to this screen. Quite a bit less overwhelming than the prior version. So this is what UX does. You can see in pretty much every feature and function represented on the screen that an absolute focus on individual users was applied here. You can also sort of take a closer look and see how each of the 5 disciplines is working together here. Obviously, from a content strategy background, it's pretty clear that heavy content strategy was involved, but you can also see the each of the other aspects, including design. That's a big standout here, and how all of those aspects came together with a fully fledged team and a UX focus in that team to form this product. And this kind of thing produces results. So other projects have seen 45% increase in traffic in a public site, 65% reduction in maintenance over time. That's a huge one. And a 465% increase in mobile use. So a redesigned mobile experience with UX. These are the sorts of results that come out of UX all the time. This is what a fully fledged project team focusing on users can create. But what about money, right? What about money and stakeholder approval? Because if you recall that sort of before example that I showed you, they and many, many other companies are up against the realities of limited budgets and lack of stakeholder approval. And without those things, it's pretty dang hard to start incorporating UX or any other digital product changes for that matter into your team strategy and approach. But thankfully, if you only have the budget and the go-ahead for a single UX hire, you can make that work for you. And if you're sitting there thinking, okay, Jessica, didn't you just spend the last 20 minutes telling us that one person can't do it? You would be correct. One person can't handle UX all by themselves. But one person can be incorporated into an existing team, excuse me, I'm so sorry, and share enough of their UX know-how with the rest of that team to make a single UX hire work for you. The important part there is that you have to go about hiring that UX professional in the right way. So let's walk through those steps. What does that look like, practically speaking? It starts with identifying your team's gaps. So before you ever write a job description or actually start looking at individuals to hire to the position, you have to understand what of those 5 core disciplines your team is missing at this point. So let's walk through how that might work. Let's say this is your team. Your team is Romeo and Juliet. Obviously, this is a small team, but just by way of example. And we'll say Romeo's a front-end developer and Juliet is a back-end developer. And I'm kind of poking fun at the idea of a development team isolated from those other disciplines because that's super, super common, right? So let's say all you have represented out of those 5 core disciplines on your team right now, you only have development covered. That means you're missing visual designers, content strategists on down the line. You're missing 4 key disciplines. So when you go to look for a UX professional, look for someone that comes from one of those 4 key backgrounds. Because of course, they need to be involved in those hands-on day-to-day product decisions, and they will be able and best equipped to do so if they are actually able to apply their know-how from this discipline and just do it with a UX perspective. Now, when you're assessing your team's current gaps, make sure you're paying attention to untapped potential. So that means if you happen to have someone on your team that is working as a developer, but in some past life, they come from a visual design background, rewrite their job description so that they can cover another one of those core disciplines. That just means you don't have to hire a UX professional that's a visual designer, because at the bare minimum, even though they don't have that UX know-how already, one of your core disciplines is covered and you don't have to hire someone from that background. So that's step one. Once you identify your team's current gaps, you have to prioritize those gaps based on upcoming project needs. So again, let's say you only have developers on your team right now, but you're about to work on a project where you're building a ton of forms that look something like this, and maybe they're a little more complex. But anyway, if you have developers, yes, you can functionally do this in your sleep. You can build these forms all day long. But can you write effective questions to be able to elicit the sort of responses that you're looking for? Can you structure your forms in such a way, especially if there are many of them, that humans, real people, are actually going to understand how to use them? Maybe not so much. So the UX professional that you hire should be from a background of content strategy, information architecture, or both. Definitely not a UX developer, because you already have that area covered. Let's look at another example. Maybe you're developing some sort of application to triage patients coming into a healthcare system, like a doctor's office, whatever. So you have developers on your team. Again, you can build this in your sleep. That's no issue. But especially for something like an application that's going to be used by patients that could come from many different backgrounds, a user research perspective is going to be really important. It's probably also going to be super important to communicate all of your screens and all of the information on those screens in a very soothing, calming way, because patients are obviously dealing with some sort of issue, and that's going to be important. So the UX professional that you hire should be from a background of either visual design or user research. So that's how, once you identify your gaps in your existing team, you look at what you have coming down the pipeline for your projects, and you say, okay, which of these disciplines is it going to be most helpful to have at that point? Look for a UX professional in that discipline. And next up, you have to support your new hire. Yes, I'm skipping the step of actually hiring the person, because that is actually the easiest step out of this entire process. This process is doable, but actually hiring the person, if you do the first two steps, you're going to have a really great understanding of the type of individual you need to hire and the sort of background they need to come from, professionally speaking. Supporting your new hire is where many companies who are attempting to hire a UX professional, great idea, right? They're doing what they are supposed to be doing. They get to this point and they falter because they start treating their individual like a UX unicorn. That is heavily involved with how they incorporate them into their existing teams. But if you start treating your professional like a UX unicorn, they're going to start acting like one, which means they're going to disappear into the magical forest of LinkedIn, and you're never going to hear from them again. In other words, they're going to quit. You can't afford that for your project timeline, budget, or visibility with stakeholders. So that really starts with where you place your UX hire in your team structure. If you isolate them over here on this island by themselves, you're only going to promote the idea that UX professionals are some weird magical creature off doing things by themselves. And that's not where they belong. Place them in an existing team structure so that they can be immediately involved in those hands-on day-to-day project and product decisions. And yes, in all of your meetings. Now, beyond that, your UX professional is going to be able to sort of provide resources to the other members of your team. So things like UX reading lists, things to start getting the other members of your team comfortable with the idea of UX. They don't have to be excited about it yet, but comfortable and at least at a base level understanding the value of UX. That sets you up for the most critical step of this process. And really what you're going for, sharing the UX know-how. Because you're right, excuse me, one UX professional cannot do usability all by themselves, but they can bring enough UX know-how to the table to share it with the other members of your team and start building that UX understanding across the board in every discipline. But at this step, you have to be realistic. Just like one person can't handle UX all by themselves, your new UX hire is not going to be able to turn your existing product team into a team of fully fledged UX professionals. But that's not what you're aiming for in the first place. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, y'all. You are aiming for a UX happy team. In other words, you're aiming for a team of professionals who each, in their various disciplines, even if they're not UX pros, they understand the value of UX. They understand the value of incorporating it into their own day-to-day work, and they at least have a baseline understanding of how to do so in an effective way. That is what a UX happy team is, and that starts producing results. This is what progress looks like. You do not, at every point, need a fully fledged UX team to improve your digital product and to start seeing some of those results. You do need UX know-how, and especially with one person that the rest of your team can refer back to and sort of lean on for those deeper, more complex UX decisions and best practices. That is what progress looks like. That starts producing things like 465% increase in mobile use and the other metrics that we talked about. But that only works if you absolutely avoid treating your UX professional like a UX unicorn. So if you don't incorporate them into your team in the right way, you will not see those results. And you're also probably going to exacerbate this whole issue that UX professionals are some weird other thing. Most importantly, though, you're not going to get the budget and the approval for additional UX improvements to your digital product. So avoid at all costs treating your new UX hire like a UX unicorn. And if you do that correctly by following these 4 steps, you just might position yourself in such a way that you can get the budget and the go-ahead for another UX hire, right? And that's really the ideal state. If you can continue incorporating deep UX know-how into your team because you can get the budget and the resources for it and the approval for it, by all means, do so, because that's only going to continue to make your digital product better and better over time. It's also going to allow the rest of your team to have more one-on-one time with someone that understands UX, which means their own work is improving and they're producing better digital products and contributing to the overall goal of your team and of your company better. But even if not, even if you don't get the budget and the go-ahead for an additional UX hire, a fully fledged product team incorporating to their best ability UX knowledge and UX best practices in their day-to-day work is probably not, I guess, the ideal state or the perfect magical state out there, but it is going to produce results and it is going to produce progress. That's what you're aiming for, and that is success when it comes to hiring a UX professional. And it only works if you refuse to treat them like a UX unicorn. You can find further reading about user experience and all things company culture related down to some more technical details at True Matters blog. That's where you'll find the article that this particular talk was based off of, UX unicorns do not exist. And I sort of promote this article as well, A Developer's Guide to Working with UX Pros, because a lot of people that come from development backgrounds and work with development teams have a lot of trouble figuring out how UX know-how can get incorporated into their processes. So this helps sort of clarify that situation as well. Beyond that, you can find me on Twitter or at True Matters website. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions for me. Thank you for joining, and also thank you for bearing with my hacking cough throughout that entire presentation.